Sure. So the grant was made possible by the Act for ALS, which was an act that was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden in December of 2021. And basically, the point of this act was to encourage public-private partnerships to help to innovate new treatments for ALS and make them more accessible to patients and people living with ALS. So we decided to participate in the grant application process because we're committed at Clene to trying to do our very best to bring this new therapy that we are developing to the ALS population. We're very excited about this new therapy because it actually is a very novel type of therapy. It's not a small molecule. It's not a biologic. It's a suspension of gold nanocrystals that have catalytic activity. This catalytic activity helps neurons survive many disease-related stressors, and in the context of ALS, helps those motor neurons survive that are dying in ALS. So the grant allows us to grant access, to give access to persons living with ALS who would normally not qualify for a clinical trial, who are perhaps more advanced in their disease state. And this falls in line very much with Clene's commitment to granting as much access to what we think is a safe and quite possibly very effective new treatment for ALS. So there are actually two aspects to the grant that I would like to highlight, if that's okay. The first aspect, of course, is accessibility. We wrote the grant so that, and we designed the expanded access protocol to be as inclusive as possible. Like I said, we want to include those individuals who do not otherwise qualify for a clinical trial in ALS. On top of that, we recognize that people living with ALS sometimes have a great deal of health challenges that will make it very difficult for them to make clinical visits regularly, as a rigorous clinical trial might do. So we partnered with an organization that's a telehealth neurology clinic and offers neurology treatment for patients or people living with ALS throughout all 50 states. That means we can reach people in rural areas, people who are not living close by to these major clinical centers that are usually the centers for clinical trials. We can reach them and we can include them in our EAP, and they can have access to CNM Au8. We're particularly excited about this because in two independent, randomized, placebo-controlled, phase 2 clinical trials, CNM Au8 was shown to have some very positive clinical effects. It was shown to not only increase survival, so it had a survival benefit, but it also delayed clinical worsening. So that means that, as patients progress in their disease, their respiratory function declines, their muscular functions decline. And we were able to show in these two independent phase 2 clinical trials that CNM Au8 had signals of efficacy. So not only does it have a very safe profile, but it also has the potential to be very effective. And this is why it's so meaningful to us to be able to grant people who would normally not have the opportunity to try CNM Au8 and see. So that's one aspect of it, the accessibility. The second aspect that is important to us is, of course, the scientific aspect. So as part of the expanded access protocol that's been funded, we will be collecting scientific data, data on how the participants are doing on our drug, such as survival, clinical worsening, and biomarkers. And this is specifically important to us because in our phase 2 clinical trials, the inclusion-exclusion criteria have to be carefully selected. Patients have to be carefully selected. But in this expanded access protocol, we'll essentially be accepting a wide range of participants with a wide range of progression throughout their disease. That means that we'll be collecting real-world data. How would once the drug, let's say, is approved, how would patients who have ALS respond to it, regardless of their length of disease, their time from disease onset, regardless of their gender, their sex, their age? That's the kind of question that we're interested in answering in this expanded access protocol as well. So I would like to say that Clene Nanomedicine is extremely grateful to our partners in this application. They would be Columbia University as well as Synapticure, who I defined earlier. We're grateful also to people living with ALS who are supporting clinical trials, who give up their time and their interest in supporting scientific research to advance the actual field and to allow innovations to occur. And finally, we are also very grateful to the NINDS of the NIH for implementing this grant process and for basically giving us a vote of confidence at Clene and giving us this opportunity to show what we can do with our drug.